So it should start recording now. Hi, everyone. Most of you know me. My name is Madison. And I want to thank you for joining us for our 10-minute thesis series. We're really excited to get this started, and hopefully we can continue this on the first Tuesday of every month for the rest of the academic year. So I'm going to record this session and then I'll post it on YouTube later on. So if you want to watch the recording later or share it with anybody, feel free to do so. If you don't want to be recorded, please don't have your video camera on. Or you're more than welcome to chat via the chat box on the side if you don't want your voice recorded as well. Okay.
Well, welcome everyone. This is the first of the 10-minute thesis series. So we've got two terrific speakers first up today. I'm Professor Ross Pryor, postgraduate research tutor for arts and humanities. So I get to see everyone through from beginning to end, which is a great pleasure. So what we'll do is I'll ask everyone to turn off their microphones except those people who are speaking. That just cuts down the feedback and the noise. So this is a terrific initiative. Madison and I have been working on this for a while. A version of this was talked about back last year, actually. And now we're doing it online rather than in person. We're virtual. But we should, that shouldn't hamper anything at all. And we can travel across the waves. And our first speaker is Spiros, who, yes, who is was terrific in responding first to our invitation. And his thesis is an examination of the emotional impact of the insertion of documentary footage into trauma cinema. So Spiros, it's over to you for 10 minutes, and then we've got 15 minutes of questions from the room.
Thank you, Professor Ross. Hello, everybody. I'm gonna take you through my thesis in hopefully 10 minutes now, and I'm gonna give you the main points on it. I'll just share my screen because I prepared a 6-slide presentation for that purpose. Let me just share it now. Okay, I'll start sharing now. So, my thesis, actually, my main research question was, I wanted to examine how the viewer, the spectator of a film falling into the drama cinema genre, and specifically the 9/11 subgenre of drama cinema, is moved, if at all emotionally, by the insertion of footage or still pictures that are not staged, but actually are of an actuality of a non-fiction nature. So I went back to the bibliography through my literature review and found out that 2 elements contained in drama cinema feature films are proved to move the viewer emotionally. The first one is filmic violence and the degree of it contained in those films. And I found in the bibliography that films that contain violence, they offer the spectator an emotional jolt. So, and there's a sliding scale of the degree of emotional violence, filmic violence contained in those films. And there's a fine point where that violence becomes unpalatable, repulsive, appalling. So this is the first proven element that moves the spectator in the right amount. And the other one is the extent of perceived realism. So how real the narrative appears to the spectator to be. And because those films of drama cinema most of them are based on real events that took place in real life, either genocides like Hotel Rwanda, terrorist attacks like 9/11, or the 7/7 London bombings, assassinations of political figures like Oliver Stone's JFK. So these two elements, when in interplay in stage films, they benefit the viewer by drawing him or her further into the narrative. And this gives the spectator pleasure by being immersed in the narrative. So I wanted to see if there is a third element that can be used in those films to move the viewer emotionally further to a greater extent. And I arrived at the actuality traumatic footage, which is actually these two, the violent filming footage and the realism of the narrative, and gender, a third, say, type of footage. And this is the actuality footage, the documentary inserts. And also in my literature, by reviewing the literature, I found out that when these real pieces of footage, say the second plane crashing into the South Tower in the World Trade Center, when watched, say, fragmentally, say independently in YouTube or in Vimeo or in other such platforms, can bring about a repulsion to the viewer and may result in a stress response. However, when this very same footage is inserted in the context of a feature film that is by nature staged, I'm not talking about documentaries, I'm talking about staged narratives making use of A-listers or other actors. So a fresh emotional response is evoked from viewers when these real violent clips are recontextualized by being used in these staged narratives of trauma cinema. And this was my main hypothesis. And I went up, just a minute. Yes, I selected 3 films from the 9/11 subgenre of trauma cinema to examine: Oliver Stone's World Trade Center, Paul Greengrass's United 93, and Catherine Bigelow's Zero Dark 30. The reason I selected these films was that World Trade Center and United 93 came out more or less the same, about the same time, the same point in time, and they were the first films to touch upon this sensitive subject of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, except for documentaries which did it before. But these were the first mainstream Hollywood films that dealt with the catastrophe brought about by the 9/11 attacks. And Zero Dark 30, because again, it was the first film that touched upon the subject of hunting down Osama bin Laden, the architect of the terrorist attacks, and offering some form of retribution by killing him. So I devised, in collaboration with my supervisory team, I devised 2 methods of analysis. At first, we wanted to go with skin conductance tests and this kind of, but it was difficult to get ethical approval to delve into these techniques. And me being a remote student, I mean an international student doing it via distance learning, I resorted in devising 2 forms of analysis. First, my primary analysis, which basically was a textual reading of the 3 films based on their technical cinematic facets, like cinematography and editing, which was predominantly based on Bordwell's and Thompson's theory, formalist film theory. So how I went about is that I dissected the 3 films' narratives, pinpointed and isolated the documentary inserts, so the sections containing actuality footage. Then I further divided those documentary inserts into the basic building block of the films, which is the shot. So, and by using specialized software called Cinemetrics, I measured 17 different traits of these documentary inserts. I measured the average shot length, the speed, their separate duration, their collective duration, and mainly I analyzed their cinematography and editing with the primary purpose of identifying commonalities in their themes, and the way in which these documentary inserts were used across the three films. And to complement the findings of my primary analysis, I resorted in a secondary analysis, which basically looked at the critics, viewers, and academic reception of the films selected, both contemporary to the release of the films and subsequently. And this was based primarily on Catherine Steiger's work on reception studies, specifically the concept of the informed reader. And I arrived at 3 tiers of sources in doing my secondary analysis, with them offering and descending degree of research reliance. So my first tier comprised of the New York Times, I think the Hollywood Reporter, and then I took a total of 65 film reviews that I used in interpreting the language used by the reviewers, the critics, the academics in analyzing those films. And again, I tried to find specific references to the documentary inserts contained in these films and how the viewers, the critics, were affected by them. So what I did was that I found certain characteristics of the actuality footage that are capable, that basically are used recurrently by the directors that make use of these documentary inserts. And I found also that the narratives of these 3 films are accommodating of documentary inserts, because not so much World Trade Center, because that contains spectacle and recognizable actors, and it's more Hollywood inclined, say, but especially United 93 and Zero Dark 30, which have a more cinema verite filmmaking style, and they're making use of many non-fiction tropes like natural available lighting and lack of spectacle, and they have also real people playing themselves. And they also identify themselves that are based on true events. I found certain of those diegetic codes that signal the viewer that the film is it's hyper-realistic. And also I found out through my textual analysis that the method of deployment of these documentary inserts via diegetic objects like the television, which the television stands as a symbol for the catastrophe on the day because of the constant reliance of the news showing this actuality footage, like the second plane crashing on the South Tower, both towers collapsing, the Pentagon up in flames. Those methods of conveyance of this actuality footage play a huge role because they reignite traumatic memory. And via certain pathways that these diegetic codes activate, the viewer is further immersed into the narrative via heightening the realism of the narrative. So he goes or she goes on a trip by being immersed. And when the viewer comes out of it, he or she has been more emotionally viewed compared to if these documentary inserts were not utilized in the
30
narrative.
seconds, Spiros.
Sorry?
30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm just at my conclusion. So I arrived at the conclusion that juxtaposing reenactment, that is the staged footage used by the feature films, drama, again, by poetic license, by dramatizing events, and by inserting actuality footage, provides an effective combination of elements within a drama cinema feature film. And this works synergistically towards encouraging an emotional response by increasing the filmic verisimilitude of these films, which ultimately leads to greater spectatorial pleasure, assuming that the spectator identifies with the subject matter. That's it.
Efaristo.
Παρακαλώ.
Right. Okay.
Let me just unshare.
We'll see your face again, and we will have some questions from the room, please. So, we either can, in the comments, just say if you want to ask a question, maybe, and we can do them in that order that way. Or you can just raise your hand. Questions for Spiros?
Well, it's not really a question, but it's more a matter of observation. You know, I did watch the movie Hotel Rwanda a long time ago, and even though I didn't personally experience that, it was a really profound and impactful movie. And it's interesting how with your conclusion you say that obviously there's more of an impact if somebody can relate to it. So I guess it's a lot of I don't necessarily know if it's empathy, but perhaps it's like character development and story development that would allow for somebody to be able to, I guess, walk in the actor's shoes.
It's like came up with the 4 modes of spectatorial identification. One of them is the voyeur. The other one is the to the traumatic events, and for empathy from the side of the viewer. So this my research, I've inserted it, and basically it's a prerequisite. That's why I inserted the qualification in my that I assume a viewer that is sympathetic to the victims of the drama cinema feature films difficulties and undergoing situations, as opposed to someone that would probably, an Islamist, that would probably cheer for the terrorists. So, that was a qualification made in my thesis. And yes, empathy is needed in order to identify with the hardships depicted and ultimately suspend your disbelief and be immersed in the narrative. And the proximity as well. You mentioned proximity. The as well of the viewer plays a major role in activating traumatic memory. So someone who was in Manhattan the day the attacks happened, specifically financial lower Manhattan, is by watching these films, which practically translates into reliving traumatic experience. This viewer may develop PTSD symptoms. Someone who happened to be thousands of miles away, but that viewer can also experience some PTSD-like syndromes if he saw the original newscast footage being relayed on the day of the attacks and was impacted by them when first watching them. The subsequent rewatching of this actuality footage in the context of drama, of feature films, again helps to activate traumatic memory pathways and impact the viewer to a similar, or but to a certain degree, that that he experienced on the day of watching the original footage. So that's why I opened up, my research was extended. I selected and analyzed 3 films characteristic of the 9/11, representative of the 9/11 subgenre of drama cinema, but my conclusion states that all the films belonging to the drama cinema genre that contain documentary footage and these share the same characteristics as the ones examined, relate to collective forms of trauma or personal forms of trauma, they can move the viewer equally as the 3 ones examined. So Hotel Rwanda is a fine example of what you mentioned.
Any other questions for Spiros? Stephen looks as though he's got one on his lips. No, I thought you were ready to launch into one.
Spiros, I have more questions about
Max.
Yeah, sorry. Spiros, I have more of a question about your experience about of doing a PhD from a distance, because obviously we're all socially distancing.
Yes.
So it seems that you're an absolute expert in like we're living in right now. So I was just more wondering if you could talk a little bit just about your experience about doing this PhD abroad.
Yeah, that's a good question, because when I embarked on this academic journey in October 2013, I didn't know what to expect. I had my doubts. I lived and studied in the UK for 4 years, but this was a whole different ball game. So I was skeptical about it, not having physical meetings with my supervisors, and only resorting to exchanging emails and speaking by a phone and stuff. But because the PhD is primarily a lonely task, so you're practically being converted into an academic hermit. So most of the time I was on my PC and doing my research, and in frequent intervals I was dropping a line to my supervisors, asking them if I'm on the right path, if I'm doing it. But when you have a supportive supervisory team readily available to help you and all, I think it does no difference. I mean, okay, being there is beneficial. I mean, and to your psychology, to your attitude, you develop more skills, I mean, by presenting in person rather than via video conferencing software. But in the end, because my supervisors were there every time I needed them, either for moral support or for academic guidance or for any other matter pertaining to my PhD, I found out that this past 7 years, except for being like a worthwhile and fascinating ride, they flew on. They were passed so quickly without any difficulties, apart from the occasional minor disagreement with the supervisory team, the getting back on track. But that applies both to having a physical presence when you're doing your PhD or doing it remotely. In the end, I would prefer to be on site to do it because it's a different experience being there in person. But it was, I have no doubt, and I can vouch for this, that it had absolutely no detriment to the end result of my research and my thesis. How about you? Now you are being socially distanced. Do you find an indifference compared to doing it in person?
No, not in particular, I guess. But the only thing that sometimes the best ideas come in when you're in a pub having a couple of beers and then talking to someone just informally. I guess that's the only element that's gone. But yeah.
Well, we
Those
could have had drinks this
wine
evening.
nights for Doctoral Student
True.
Society, just saying.
Yes, Madison, yes, that's an advertisement. So
Actually, during the 7 years of doing my PhD, I only visited Wolverhampton and the university just once, this past December, on occasion of my viva. So it was uncanny to put a face to all those names that have been, collaborating for the past 6 years and actually see the university that I was enrolled with and doing my my PhD.
well, the Viva Voces are now online, so we do them this way via Teams now. So that's the full experience. Yes. So, Spiros, can I ask you in summary, because this is a question that you're often asked in a Viva Voce, what is the thesis of your thesis in 2 minutes? The thesis of your thesis.
The thesis of my thesis is by making strategic usage of documentary footage in drama cinema feature films in conjunction with certain other cinematographical and editing diegetic modes, and making that come in interplay with stage footage in certain intervals of the film in question, can benefit the viewer via heightening the underlying cinematic realism of the film watched, the drama cinema feature film, and this results in a greater immersion on the side of the viewer in the staged narrative watched, and based on the bibliography, on the literature review, this again in turn results in greater spectatorial pleasure. So it's a useful documentary inserts, actually the footage, is a useful tool at the hands of the filmmaker to further draw the viewer into his cinematic world.
Right. Thank you, Spiros. That's what we've all got to get used to doing, summing things up, neatly, concisely. So, Spiros, thank you. You were the first in this total series. So well done for kicking us off today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my work.
A pleasure. So we will now move to our second speaker. So while Max gets his screen sharing, Max's thesis title is much shorter, Dusk of Virtualities.
Yes.
Very short, isn't it? It's short and sweet.
I went very short and very ambiguous, so no one has any clue what is going to happen.
All right, over to you for 10 minutes.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to do the experiment to present without PowerPoint, because I always feel like PowerPoint has been taking over my life. So basically, I'm going to start with, I asked the question, what does it mean to be virtually present? So we're all now here, virtually present, and normally when we ask ourselves that question, it's really about, sorry, give me a second, I will put on a timer here for myself too. So when I ask what does it mean to be virtually present, we always think about how we are present in a digital world. So it can be here via Teams, but also in a video gaming world or on social media. But in my thesis, I do a conceptual analysis of the virtual, because the digital virtual, as I call it, everything that is mediated by a computer, is just one meaning of the virtual. And there's another meaning of the virtual that I think is just as interesting and really gives us some interesting perspectives on what virtual media could do. So we have the digital virtual meaning and we have the philosophical meaning of the virtual. So the philosophical meaning of the virtual is always connected to the actual. So I will give you the example of the bedroom. You probably are now in your study or in your bedroom. So the bedroom, there's an actual bedroom, the actual space with actual objects like your bed, your drawer, your mirror, but there's also a virtual bedroom. And this is being virtually present in the sense that this is your dreams, your memories. If you work on your thesis in your bedroom right now, it's about imagining things for your thesis, and those and there might also be a particular sound or a particular smell that you really associate with your bedroom. So it's really what makes it your bedroom, what makes it so you have the actual space and you have the virtual place. When we then think of the phenomenological virtual, as I call it, because it's really this embodied coexistence of your imagination, memory, and your senses, if you then compare it to what we think digital virtual media can do, I state that virtual media do not intuitively help mediate between us and our immediate surroundings, because their purposes have been shaped by modernity's preoccupations with products and fantasies of the human mind. Now, this sounds still very vague, so please allow me to further explain. First, to go back to the phenomenological virtual. There are a couple of elements just from the bedroom example that are important. So first, it's ambiguous. You might have a daydream there, and it might have happened because you were looking out of your window. It might have happened because there was that particular smell. Maybe there was this dream you just remembered. It's always just a very ambiguous moment how your cognition interacts with your immediate surroundings. Then the second element is that it's always about being here. It's always about being in your immediate surroundings and virtually being present there. And it's also holistic in the sense that it's just basically all the faculties and senses that are operating there. So if we then go to the digital virtual and really to everything that's mediated by a computer, the first thing, if we go to the ambiguous, here you see the opposite. The computer is really just a prime example of this idea of modernity, that we want the world in clear informational structures. In the sense of the computer, we're talking about data, for instance. So you have big data. If we just amass enough data, we will be able to alter behavior, alter our whole society. But this is not really particular to the computer. This really goes back to a way of thinking in modernity, that if we if we remake the world, so to say, in information, in ever smaller pieces of information, we can alter it to our likings. So think of an atomic model, for instance. We have pulled apart the world in ever smaller atoms, and in the end we made an atomic bomb, which we were able to wipe out complete cities. So these clear informational structures are very much focused on vision. So with the phenomenological virtual, as I said, it's very holistic. You very much have this, that all the senses and faculties are involved. But with the computer, it's really about everything needs to be visualized. And everything being visualized is actually a very important part of thinking in modernity too, but really goes back to old Greek philosophy, in which you have two strands. You have, basic strands. You have Aristotle in his empirical model. So everything I see, I can state if it's real through vision and thinking. And with Plato, it's more that it's about thinking, and what I see isn't the real form. It's the ideal form that I only can reach by thinking it. So when we think of then deciding what is real by visual confirmation, then we also think of, with the computer, you have virtual worlds, for instance, but also social media, but also think of a virtual world like the Matrix, or in Inception, or the Black Mirror episodes. There's always this question about, is it real? Is it what I see on my computer screen? Is it real? This is a very odd question, because it's only a visual question. In any other way, sure, it's real, but we want to visually confirm it, that is real. You don't have that element with phenomenological virtual. It's not about deciding if your daydream is real or your dream is real or your memory is real. It's just something that happens in your cognition while you're in an actual space, while you're at your immediate surroundings. So these virtual worlds are always over there. With the phenomenological virtual, as I said, it's always about being here, being present in my immediate surroundings. But with digital virtual worlds, they're always somewhere, but not here. This Teams meeting, where is it? It's not here for us particularly. When we're talking about video game worlds, we're always talking about something that's over there. When we're talking about social media interactions or the social media realm, it's always over there. It's never here. It's never about, as I said, mediating my technology is never used to mediate between me and my immediate surroundings. And the last thing with these digital virtual with the digital virtual is that it's completely anthropocentric. It's all about human creation, human thoughts, and us interacting with each other, really cutting the rest of the world out of it. So a virtual world, digital virtual world is created by a human designer, but also think of social media in which I create a little thought, I tweet it out, and then some of you might tweet back to me. And it's all about this sort of circle, you can say, of just human creation and human interaction on that creation. So that's basically the first part of my thesis, really analyzing that difference of the concept. And then the second part of my thesis is that I want to bring together this digital virtual and phenomenological virtual, because I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I just think we need to rethink what we want to do with these technologies. So I'm using Japanese perspectives for this, because I actually think that a Eurocentric approach has been a bit of a problem in this area. Also because of this system of modernity, of modern thinking, of wanting to pull the world apart in ever smaller pieces, and not so much how we inhibit the world. And with Japanese perspective, that's a bit better for this topic. So Thomas Kusul is a philosopher who specializes in both Western and Japanese philosophy, explains that. So on the Western side, you have, and this is really just me generalizing a little bit for the presentation, but on the Western side, you have what I was saying about this informational structure in putting the world apart in ever smaller pieces, and then look how part A and B interact with each other and how they relate to each other. It's a relational model. But with Japanese thinkers, they're much more interested in how I overlap with other creatures, how I overlap with my immediate surroundings or with objects, and how then I interact in that ambiguous overlap. So it's much less about factual statements and much more about how do I act in an ambiguous overlap of the world. And this ambiguity is, you can see it everywhere in Japanese literature and Japanese films, video games. But for instance, the Japanese writer Junichiro Tanizaki, he explains that if you need an image for Western modernity, it's electrical light. Everything comes in under an electrical light. So it's so clear, and then we can analyze it and we can decide if it's real or not. But Japanese thinkers and art are much more interested in the shadow and this idea of the little flame, and then they're not interested in the flame, but the outer area, the outer region where light and darkness are sort of merging, but you can't really figure it out. I think that sort of perspective of really looking at an ambiguous overlap is going to be useful in analyzing the virtual. And the second element that I also use is something called techno-animism. So animism is that everything in the world, just like humans, has agency, and human agency is not the most important thing. It's on the same level. And with techno-animism, this also involves technology, and it becomes technology then also gets agency and becomes just part of a wider pool of agency. And in the end, then I want to look at virtual technology in a more than human world and look at our virtual presence in a dusk of virtualities. That's it.
Great, thank you, Max. Yes, well, there's a lot there, but it's nice to get it in 10 minutes. Yeah. So, questions, please, for Max. Don't be shy.
This isn't necessarily a question, but while you were talking, yeah, I really like the idea of, I guess, there being like a perfect form of something and then it represented in the physical world. So like something like Play-Doh or with this digital world and how we interact with it. But this is going to be really weird. But I was listening to this woman who had a near-death experience. And so she was talking about how she died for like 5 minutes. And when her soul left her body, she was explaining what she experienced throughout that. And she said when she went to heaven or whatever you personally believe in, that she was with the perfect form of everything. There was the perfect flower, like perfect form of everything. And then when she came back into her body, it was like she had this new understanding of like representation in this physical world. Now, I don't know if that's something you want to look into, but it's interesting because there's so many different theories that essentially have the same concepts. You know what I mean? So perhaps not just, I mean, it's interesting how you're taking on the Japanese view. It's valuable. So I guess I have a question. I don't know if I missed this. Is there any particular reason why you decided Japan? Do you speak Japanese? Have you visited? What is the fascination?
Yeah, no, so I'm learning Japanese. I'm taking Japanese lessons, but I'm really looking at it in a global, more from a global perspective. So really just also Japanese video games and films and literature and translation, because it's also transmedial in its focus, but I couldn't really talk about it in 10 minutes. Yeah, no, my interest was mostly just first from personal history, that I really grew up with Japanese culture. But I noticed that I always was very disinterested in questions about realness with the virtual worlds and whenever I was watching The Matrix or Black Mirror or whatever, I was always deeply uninterested in if it's real or not real. And also because I thought it was a very strange question. And I noticed that it was very much absent always in Japanese video games or literature or films that were dealing with the same topics. And that got me interested in it. And that's basically why I sort of got interested in it and then started reading Japanese authors and really found their perspective super interesting. And I noticed then that there was quite a lack in the academic literature when it came to these perspectives. It's still, they used these perspectives, but it's still also a very, as I said, Eurocentric discussion that's really coming from our way of thinking, while I think that our way of thinking in this particular topic is a bit problematic. Because we want to decide what is real and what is not real. And that question is mainly absent with Japanese thinkers. So that's why.
Max, do you think, I mean, a lot of this preoccupation with realness comes from Konstantin Stanislavski, you know, in the late 1800s in theatre. And he was obsessed by making things real. And the Americans then took on versions of his system, which became method acting, which has produced, you know, absolute realism. The people seem to, that's all they seem to want. And if it doesn't look like that, they get a bit edgy and think that it's not good theatre or film or whatever it might be. And of course, psychology came out of the same period as well. So, I mean, have you explored any of those connections? Because for him, it was all about truth. Yeah. And truth can mean all sorts of things, but I wonder if you've got a view about that.
Well, actually, with psychology, there's definitely a link. More with psychiatry, I guess, but with psychoanalysis, that there's with Freud, for instance, he's very much about by reaching inside of yourself and really going back to your memories, you can decide on sort of like real feelings or the real reasons behind things. And there's then, for instance, a Japanese psychiatrist called Morita, and he really criticizes that there's sort of like this weird thing of, if you just think long enough or look long enough at something, we decide on what is real. But it's much more important, he says, how that you act and that you sort of deal with anxiety and just make it a little holistic part of your daily life. So really deciding on that element, for instance, your feelings, if it's real or not real, he says that's not really important. And then with theater, I guess I'm not using theater in particular, but it's just really just the discussions that you see with video graphics, for instance, with video games. There's so much discussion about realism and how real it looks, and as if it's real. You see that a lot, and that's pretty much absent with Japanese thinkers, because it's just to them not really an interesting question. And I think it's not an interesting question too, in many regards. And I think I'm really looking more at it from that perspective, and not so much theater.
So maybe it comes down to what is truthful rather than realistic.
Yeah,
there's an element of truth even in the abstract, or non-realistic. Maybe. I mean, it's a thought anyway.
Yeah, no, it's definitely so. I think with you see that a lot with because Japanese philosophy only really started because it's imported. It's there wasn't really a philosophical method because before 1860 in Japan, when Japan had to open up again to the world. And you saw then that first Japanese philosophers really, or first Japanese thinkers tried to grasp Western philosophy. And then later on, they started adding things to it. And one of the criticisms they had was really, there's much more truth in our actions a lot of the times than really making statements of truth. So I guess that's sort of underlying it constantly. Yeah. So it's definitely true. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Any more questions for Max? You can type your question and I'll read it out if you prefer to do that, people. Max, what brought you to this research question?
I don't know. Let's see. I know sort of just the story behind it was that I was I traveled a few times through Japan, and the last time I was in the Northern Island, Hokkaido, and I was just traveling around, and it was just a combination of reading a couple of books in the trains I was taking, and just being, and also had my Nintendo Switch with me, so I was also playing video games, and it just started brewing a little bit, and so it's really one of those stories in which I just had a personal experience, in which a lot of thoughts started coming together a little bit. So yeah, that's basically. But my research first, because my research really changed as it does, because I was first much more focused on the technological aspect of it. So really looking at these new technologies like virtual reality, well, new, or these more futuristic technologies like virtual reality, augmented reality, and how those technologies would alter our way of thinking about virtual experience. But then during my research, I really became interested more in the sort of conceptual underpinnings of it, because that's where it all starts, just the concept of the virtual. What do we mean with it? So that's how I really came to the conceptual side of it.
Right. Thank you. Very interesting. Yeah. Any other questions for Max? I might ask you to do the same thing and to give us the thesis of your thesis in 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do it really short. So
Yeah.
the thesis of my thesis is really just rethinking how we use virtual media and how virtual media or technology can help us be virtually present in our immediate surroundings instead of creating these distant digital worlds, and really help us to be virtually present in our immediate surroundings, but also relate more to the non-human. So that.
Fascinating. Well, we all look forward to reading it.
Yeah.
Being fully present is one of those great things. If people can achieve it, it means a lot. So thank you, Max. Really terrific. So we've got time for an advertisement. There's always an advertisement, isn't there? And so we're perfectly on time. So Madison, your advertisement, please.
Okay. Let's figure out how to share my screen.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out how to share my screen. It's not showing me the document I need. That's weird.
This will become so slick afterwards.
I know, it's not even giving me the option for just even my desktop, so I can at least do that.
You're in the share tray.
Yeah, I'm in the share tray.
And is your document already open on your desktop?
Yes. Okay.
Someone had this problem earlier too, and they said they had to download it or something.
Oh, yeah, I'm using the desktop app. That's all right. Just give me 1 second to load my emails, and I'll just share it from my email.
It's interesting how everyone's vernacular has changed in 6 months. We're using terms we never thought of. So we still haven't got it, Madison.
Yeah, I just need to wait for my computer to load. It's okay.
Oh, it's slow, is it?
Oh yeah, my computer's like 6 years old.
If anyone wants to type any statements in the message box, if you want to send messages to any of the speakers, say anything, please do so. You can find that in the floating bar on your screen. You'll see a box with 3 lines through it. Okay. And you can send some messages. This looks like an advertisement.
Oh, yes. I'm sharing it from my email just because it wasn't loading on my pictures. But anyways, so the next 10-minute thesis is going to be on the 2nd of November. So that's the first Tuesday of November. And we will have Rachel Matchberg and Carl Sweeney doing their 10-minute theses on their current projects. So if you guys want to check them out and participate, please continue to stay on the mailing list, and you should receive an invite for that as well.
So thank you, Madison. That looks absolutely terrific. So it's good that we've got November sorted already. I think it's very valuable that we have a community of practice and sharing with one another, exchange of ideas. So, and you know, as Spiros said, it can be a lonely, what did you call us? Hermits, academic hermits.
Academic hermit, yeah.
So, you know, and that suits some people, but it also is good to share, challenge, debate, look at perspectives from various sides, various views. It may even trigger some ideas for your own work as well. So thank you all for being part of the inaugural 10-minute thesis series. I hope you found it beneficial. Again, if you want to type any comments, feel free to do so. You can thank the speakers if you wish, or if you want to connect with them about anything that they said, follow up on any readings, I'm sure they'll be happy to engage with you. So that being said, we will see you in November.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you again to our speakers and to Madison for her wonderful organization in bringing us together on Teams. Goodbye for now.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.